But first, to Afghanistan, where this week the capital, Kabul, succumbed to Taliban forces.
Scenes of panic and pandemonium at Kabul airport today as desperate people pour onto the runway trying to flee the country in what can only be described as a chaotic exodus. Now, people are literally clinging on to US military aircrafts as they try to take off.
Helicopters and black smoke visible. American diplomats, including the ambassador, evacuated to the airport. At least 500 staff leaving the country so far. The embassy shuttered, the flag coming down. Secretary of State Blinken declaring to ABC's Jonathan Karl, this is manifestly not Saigon.
Not Saigon? Despite the Secretary of State's insistence, that's exactly the analogy commentators were drawing. And what was US President Joe Biden telling Americans just 4 months ago?
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home. We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely.
Initially taking refuge at Camp David, Biden finally appeared this week. Here's part of what he had to say.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision.
At the Today Show, hosts Ali Langdon and Carl Stefanovic watched Biden's address live. Their reaction was one of disbelief.
Pretty surprising comments. My take of that is washing his hands of what happened. And
this is the thing that surprises me about what he said. Getting out, we have no obligation. We do not have to worry about these Afghan forces. They just rolled over. Bad luck. See you later, fellas. It's your country now. I mean, I think that's gobsmacking. That's a gobsmacking statement. It's a heartless statement.
And on 7 Sunrise, US commentator Megyn Kelly castigated Biden for abrogating his responsibility.
He blamed the Afghan government. He blamed the Afghan army. He blamed Trump. He blamed everyone but himself. The decision had been made by Trump that we needed to remove our troops. Biden claimed that he was bound by that decision when, in fact, that's not the case. Biden has reversed Trump on so many things.
Conversely, ABC's Washington correspondent Greg Jennett was almost gentle in his assessment of the president.
He'd studied the debacle in public silence for days, backed his own judgment.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
And outlined the Biden doctrine that US military force is best used to help those prepared to help themselves.
All retreat, yet somehow no surrender, is Joe Biden's presentation of this inglorious end. That is, his order for US forces to quit Afghanistan remains unshakable, even if the war on terror must now be waged remotely. Either way, the president's leaving no one in any doubt about his thinking, an act of either bold leadership or desperate persuasion.
Did Jennett really think it's a toss-up between the two? On another note, it's no surprise that the Taliban would again become dominant as the Americans scaled down their forces. What was surprising was that some commentators were pretty blasé about this when the withdrawal was announced. Here's the project in April.
I think it's such a tricky question. I know we heard Greg in that piece say that now's not the time to leave, it's the worst decision of the Biden presidency. I guess it's more a question of if we don't leave now, where we've been for 20 years, when do we leave? When is the right time to leave? When will the mission be accomplished? What will it take?
Yes, it's like some people regard the war as like it's become a permanent fixture. Now the shock that you're ending this permanent fixture is resonating, but what's the alternative?
And some commentators completely underestimated the Taliban's capability. Former Deputy NATO Representative to Afghanistan Mark Jacobson with ABC's Fran Kelly.
What I would also say, though, is this is not an imminent or immediate threat. I mean, there are going to be some who disagree with the Biden administration's decision who say, look, the moment we pull out, the Afghan government falls, and then al-Qaeda starts launching transnational attacks immediately. That's overblown.
The Taliban's previous occupation of Afghanistan was characterised by theocratic rule, brutal subjugation of women and arbitrary executions. Already we've seen horrific videos of them committing these acts once again. Incredibly, some US commentators think there's a chance they've had a makeover.
So we're not even sure which part of the Taliban will prevail and how, will the moderates prevail or will the more conservative ones prevail? So it's too early to tell.
Moderate Taliban. The mind boggles. Thank goodness our media's not that silly to ever consider such a concept, right?
Question everyone is asking is, will the Taliban reimpose the harsh brand of political Islam that characterised its rule in the 1990s? And could the leaders of the world's major Muslim nation persuade Taliban leaders to temper their extremism?
Over the past 5 or 6 years, I've been reading about a supposed moderate Taliban. Does such a thing really exist, a moderate Taliban? So maybe we have a system of very public piety, but maybe people in private aren't always shaking with fear behind closed doors. Hardly a good system, but could we cling to that as a vague hope?
Now let's bring in our panel, Herald Sun journalist Caleb Bond and media writer at The Australian, Sophie Ellsworth. Sophie, let's start with you. What are your impressions of the media coverage surrounding Afghanistan, and particularly the way in which people on the ABC have spoken about the Taliban?
Well, Jack, I'm just surprised overall with the coverage because I would have loved to have seen what the coverage would have been like if President Trump was in office. We know that the leftist media are a massive fan of Joe Biden. They go gentle, gentle on Joe every time. But this is the first time in his presidency we've actually started to see journalists question what he has done here. But even considering the fact that the Taliban might actually be okay now and more moderate is just crazy. But I am shocked that finally even places like CNN are calling Joe Biden out, saying, what is going on here? And we rarely see that with Joe Biden. I mean, Sleepy Joe can get away with whatever he wants because the media are his fan base largely.
Yeah, and Caleb, I mean, that's a really good point. All of the traditional enemies of Republicans who could have stuck in the boot, CNN, the New York Times, they have been fairly critical of Joe Biden. Yet here in Australia on the ABC, we're hearing this rhetoric that the Taliban could be moderate. It's crazy stuff.
Oh, I tell you what, the moderate Taliban, next thing we'll have a story from the ABC about murderers not so bad after all. I mean, seriously. I can't believe we're even having this discussion. You've got the Taliban getting up this week saying, oh, we're going to be good to women, we believe in women's rights, rah, rah, rah. And some people are reading it up. Pull the other one. If anyone seriously thinks that the Taliban is going to be kind to women this time around, you've got rocks in your head. And you're right, the contrast is quite stark because if you look at the US, as we've been talking about, it really is the first time that we've seen any sort of criticism of the Biden administration from the leftist media. I mean, the front page of The Economist this week, Biden's debacle, CNN has been jumping on board. Journalists from the left in America are starting to do their job. This will be one of the things, if not the thing, that defines Biden's presidency. And there's no better way to annoy journalists than to refuse to ask their questions. And that's what Biden has done this week. He came back from Camp David, stood up there, refused to ask questions. He's being asked, what about these people hanging on to planes? Oh, no, that was 5 days ago. Don't want to answer that. And then he runs back to Camp David again and hides. Biden, at this point in his presidency, has done 9 interviews. At the same time in their presidencies, Trump had done 50 interviews and Obama had done 113. Biden is refusing to front the media. We all know why that is. He's being hidden away because he's not up to the job. But he is refusing to answer questions, and there is no better way to quickly get the media offside than to not be available to them. And he's starting to see that coming to fruition.
Yeah, you're right, Caleb, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and will the media keep being critical of him?